Men are making modern women panic by avoiding them in public. The most shocking piece of data hitting men right now is that millions of women openly said they would rather run into a bear in the woods than encounter a man yet. When the economy tightens and real hardship arrives, those same women discover that the bear will not pay their rent, cover their bills, or provide any stability at all, and men have simply responded by walking away, leaving women to face the consequences of their own choices without rescue. Everybody feels in their gut these days. Men are making modern women panic by avoiding them completely, and this is not some temporary phase or social media trend. It is the direct result of decades of consistent patterns that men have finally recognized and acted upon with cold, clear logic. What you are seeing now is the winter that Kevin Samuels warned about arriving in full force, where women who spent years pushing men away with messages of independence, toxic masculinity, and endless demands are suddenly realizing that the supply of willing men has dried up and there is no easy way back. Stay with us all the way through, because by the end, you will understand exactly why men are choosing solitude over chaos, why society is shifting under our feet, and what this means for every single person watching their future unfold in real time. Men have reached a point where they look at the world around them and decide that peace in their own company beats the constant stress that comes from dealing with women who treat relationships like a one way street. For years, men heard the same lines over and over again about how they should not approach women in public because it makes them uncomfortable, or how traditional roles were oppressive and outdated. Yet now, those very same women are complaining that no one is approaching them, no one is asking them out, and no one is stepping up to provide the lifestyle they expect. This is not hypocrisy in the abstract. It is the lived reality playing out across dating apps, public spaces, and everyday conversations where men have simply stopped putting in the effort because the returns have become non existent. Think about it like this: when you keep showing up to a table where the other side takes everything and gives nothing back, eventually you stop sitting down at that table. And that is exactly what has happened here on a massive scale. Men are not angry in some explosive way, they are realistic, and they have used pattern recognition to see that investing time, energy, and resources into modern women often leads to drama, debt, and disappointment with very little upside in return. The result is a quiet exodus where men focus on their own lives, their own goals, and their own peace, while women scramble to figure out why the attention and support they once took for granted has vanished. This shift did not happen overnight. It built up over 50 years of cultural changes that told men they were defective versions of women, that their natural instincts were toxic, and that their role in society was to apologize and step back. Feminism, in its more radical forms, pushed the idea that men should be ashamed of their masculinity, that providing and protecting were outdated concepts, and that women could have it all without any trade offs or compromises. What that messaging ignored was the basic reality that men and women bring different strengths to the table. And when you demonize one side while elevating the other, you create imbalances that eventually collapse under their own weight. Men absorbed those messages, absorbed the constant criticism from media and social platforms, and absorbed the legal and social risks that come with any interaction that could be twisted into something negative. Over time, the logical response became withdrawal, because why risk everything for someone who views you as a potential threat or a walking wallet rather than a partner? This is not men being spiteful, it is men being straightforward about what they observe and choosing the path that protects their mental health, their finances, and their future. On the flip side, women are now calling this male withdrawal a crisis, and they are panicking because they are discovering that they cannot sustain their lifestyles without the utility that men have traditionally provided through dating, marriage, and everyday support. Women in online spaces are posting more and more about how men never follow through on matches, how conversations fizzle out without dates being suggested, and how the overall energy from men has gone completely flat. They talk about being ghosted or left on read as if it is some mysterious phenomenon, but the straightforward truth is that men have decided the game is not worth playing when the rules are stacked against them and the rewards are minimal. Women cannot survive long term without men subsidizing parts of their existence, whether that comes through paying for dates, covering shared expenses, or providing the stability that allows for certain lifestyles. When that subsidy dries up, the consequences hit hard, and we are seeing the early stages of that reality right now, with more women facing financial strain, debt accumulation, and a general sense of instability that they did not anticipate. Men, on the other hand, are adapting by finding ways to live below their means, building skills that allow remote or gig based income, and focusing on minimalist approaches that bring comfort without constant pressure. The economic picture makes this even clearer because inflation keeps climbing housing and food costs have become unsustainable for many, and companies continue to trim workforces while bringing in artificial intelligence to replace roles. A lot of those job losses hit fields where women have clustered in recent decades, and the safety net that society promised is fraying at the edges. Men are responding differently by stepping away from traditional 9 to 5 structures and creating their own paths, whether that means freelancing in areas like remote technical work, living off investment returns, doing light gig economy tasks, or investing in assets that generate passive income, such as real estate, where they can rent out portions to cover costs while keeping their own overhead low. This allows men to enjoy simple lives of comfort without the burnout that comes from chasing a corporate ladder that no longer guarantees security. Women, on the other hand, often find themselves deeper in debt, chasing lifestyles that social media sells as essential while the support system they counted on from men disappears. The contrast is stark, and it is sobering because it shows how choices made over years compound into very different outcomes when the external conditions tighten. Pattern recognition plays a huge role here because men have watched and learned from repeated interactions that women tend to prioritize feelings over facts, and that arguments rarely lead to genuine compromise or resolution. Instead of productive dialogue, many encounters turn into cycles of shame, insults, guilt, and gaslighting, where the goal seems to be winning at all costs rather than finding common ground. Men see this pattern play out consistently, and they reach the logical conclusion that the only real way to avoid the stress is to step back entirely, because you cannot reason your way through a dynamic where emotions override evidence every single time. This is not about hating women. It is about acknowledging that certain approaches simply do not work, and that solitude offers a level of clarity and calm that chaotic interactions never deliver. Men are learning how to thrive alone, how to build routines that serve their own well being, and how to enjoy life without the constant emotional labor that comes from trying to navigate unpredictable expectations. The peace they find in that space is real, and once experienced, it becomes hard to trade away for the uncertainty that often accompanies relationships in the current environment. Women who once thrived on the abundance of options in online dating are now reporting that most interactions lead nowhere, and that the men they connect with simply drift away without explanation. This is the direct consequence of men conserving their energy and refusing to invest in situations that show red flags early on or that demand effort without clear reciprocity. The simp economy that propped up certain dynamics for years is fading because men have woken up to the fact that endless validation and financial support without mutual contribution creates an unbalanced and ultimately unsustainable setup. When women complain about this shift, they often frame it as men being afraid or immature, but the straightforward truth is that men are exercising discernment and choosing paths that protect their resources and their sanity. Society at large is feeling the ripple effects because when half the population steps back from traditional roles, the structures that relied on their participation begin to strain, and the illusions that everything would balance out naturally start to crack. Kevin Samuels laid it out plainly when he said that winter was coming and that the warnings had been there for anyone willing to listen. Ladies, the season has arrived, and the rescue that some might have expected from men is not materializing this time around because men have decided that their own survival and peace come first. This is not a game or a temporary standoff. It is a fundamental realignment based on lived experience and observable outcomes. Women are being forced to confront the harsh realities of the world without the buffer that male utility once provided, and many are unprepared for what that looks like in practice. The panic is real because the old scripts no longer apply, and the new reality demands accountability, self reliance, and adjustments that were dismissed for decades. Men are not turning back. They are moving forward on their own terms. And that shift is reshaping everything from dating to economics to the broader social fabric. Consider the everyday examples that illustrate this point. Women post about wanting men to approach them in grocery stores or coffee shops, yet they also share stories of feeling uncomfortable or threatened by even polite interactions, creating a no win situation for men who simply choose to avoid the risk altogether. The result is public spaces filled with women wondering why no one engages, while men focus on their own errands and their own thoughts without the added layer of potential drama. This dynamic extends into digital spaces where matches sit dormant and conversations die because men have learned that putting forth effort often leads to one sided exchanges that go nowhere productive. The sobering part is that this is not malice, it is adaptation to a marketplace where the costs outweigh the benefits for one side, and the other side has yet to adjust its expectations accordingly. Men have internalized the lessons from years of feedback, and they act accordingly by conserving what they have and directing it toward their own development rather than external validation. The financial independence narrative that was sold heavily to women promised freedom and empowerment, but in practice, it has left many facing the same pressures that men have dealt with for generations without the same cultural support or preparation. When the bills pile up and the lifestyle expectations clash with reality, the absence of a willing partner to share or subsidize the load becomes glaringly obvious. Men, meanwhile, have embraced minimalist living, not out of deprivation, but out of strategic choice, recognizing that true comfort comes from controlling your own environment rather than depending on systems or people that can shift unpredictably. This includes everything from downsizing possessions to building multiple income streams that do not rely on a single employer or a single source of stability. The contrast highlights how different priorities lead to different outcomes when external conditions become more challenging, and it serves as a wake up call for anyone still clinging to outdated assumptions about how the world works. At the core of this is a simple truth about human nature and incentives. When you remove the incentives for one group to participate in a system while increasing the risks and costs they face, that group will naturally find alternatives. And that is precisely what men have done. They have found alternatives in solitude and self reliance, and in communities of like minded individuals who understand the value of peace over performance. Women who once dismissed these trends as fringe or temporary are now encountering the full weight of the shift, and the panic stems from realizing that rebuilding trust or reversing the momentum will require more than slogans or complaints. It will require genuine changes in behavior and expectations that many have not practiced in years. This is the sobering part because change is possible, but it demands honesty about past patterns and a willingness to meet reality halfway rather than expecting reality to bend to preferences. The bear analogy that circulated widely captures the disconnect perfectly. Millions of women indicated in polls and discussions that they would choose the bear over the man in a hypothetical woods encounter, framing men as inherently more dangerous. Yet, when economic winters hit and practical needs arise. The bear offers no provision, no protection, and no partnership, leaving women to navigate hardship alone. Men have responded with straightforward realism by saying, in effect, that if the bear is the preferred option, then the bear can handle the responsibilities that come with that choice. This is not cruelty, it is pattern recognition taken to its logical conclusion, where men refuse to insert themselves into situations where they are viewed as threats rather than assets. The result is a growing separation where each side learns to operate without the other, and the long term societal impacts are only beginning to reveal themselves through changing marriage rates, birth rates, and economic behaviors. Men are not disappearing from society. They are redirecting their energy toward areas that reward their efforts without the added complications that often accompany interactions with women who prioritize feelings and tests over facts and cooperation. This includes mastering skills that allow independence, whether technical remote work, creative pursuits, or strategic investments that build wealth quietly over time. The peace that comes from this redirection is tangible. And once a man experiences consistent calm without the interruptions of drama, he becomes reluctant to trade it away for uncertain returns. Women on the receiving end of this withdrawal feel the absence acutely because their social and financial strategies often relied on male participation at some level, even if that participation was downplayed or criticized in public. The wake up call here is that assumptions about endless availability have proven false, and the adjustment period is proving uncomfortable for those who did not see the trends coming. This extends beyond individual relationships into broader cultural observations, where the constant messaging about male defectiveness has created a generation of men who simply opt out of the narrative altogether. They reject the idea that they must prove their worth through endless provision or emotional labor, and instead build lives that center their own values and capabilities. The raw truth is that many women have contributed to this outcome through consistent patterns of behavior that men have cataloged over time, including demands for perfection without self reflection, double standards in accountability, and a tendency to rewrite history when outcomes do not match expectations. Men see these patterns clearly now, and they choose avoidance as the most effective strategy because engagement rarely yields the mutual respect or stability that would make the investment worthwhile. This is authoritative reality, not opinion, because it is backed by observable actions and results across large groups rather than isolated anecdotes. The economic pressures amplify everything because when costs rise and opportunities tighten, the value of reliable partnership increases, yet the trust required for that partnership has eroded significantly on one side. Men who once carried the load in traditional setups now calculate the risks of divorce, asset loss, emotional strain, and legal complications, and decide that the math does not favor commitment under current conditions. They opt instead for arrangements that keep control in their hands, whether that means short term interactions on their terms or complete independence. Women who counted on the system to enforce certain outcomes find themselves without the leverage they assumed would always exist, and the panic manifests in louder complaints and more desperate attempts to regain attention. The straightforward response from men is continued withdrawal because the incentives have not changed and the patterns remain consistent. Society as a whole feels the strain when large numbers of men step back from traditional provider and protector roles without immediate replacements. Fields that relied on male labor or male innovation see shifts companies adjust to changing workforces and cultural narratives struggle to explain why the expected balance has not materialized. The sobering wake up call is that biology, culture, and economics all intersect in ways that cannot be wished away through slogans or policies. And when one side disengages, the other must adapt or face the consequences. Men are adapting by building resilience and self sufficiency, while many women are still processing the shift and searching for explanations that avoid personal accountability. This dynamic will continue to play out over the coming years, and the outcomes will depend on how honestly each side confronts the underlying realities rather than retreating into denial or blame. Men have embraced the idea that being alone does not mean being lonely when you cultivate interests, skills, and routines that fulfill you from within. They pursue hobbies, physical fitness, financial education, and social circles that reinforce positive growth without the drama that often accompanies mixed gender dynamics in the current climate. This creates a virtuous cycle where peace leads to better decision making, better health, and greater long term satisfaction. Women who observe this from the outside sometimes interpret it as rejection or punishment, but the truthful explanation is far simpler. Men have found a better allocation of their limited time and energy, and they are sticking with what works. The panic arises when the external validation and support that once flowed freely slows to a trickle, forcing a confrontation with self reliance that was preached but not always practiced. The online dating space provides a clear window into this reality where women report high volumes of matches but low conversion into actual dates or relationships because men have grown selective and cautious. Conversations that once led to quick meetups now stall because men detect patterns of entitlement, low effort, or mismatched expectations early and choose not to invest further. This selectivity is learned behavior based on past experiences where effort was expended only to encounter ghosting games or demands that exceeded reasonable contribution. The result is a marketplace where abundance for one side does not translate into connection because the other side has raised its standards or lowered its participation. Women feel the frustration of this mismatch and express it through posts and discussions that highlight the lack of follow through, but rarely examine the role their own approaches play in creating the dynamic. The authoritative truth is that markets clear based on mutual value, and when value perceptions diverge, participation declines until adjustments occur. This brings us back to the core premise that men walking away is not a crisis for men. It is a rational response to conditions they did not create but must navigate. Women calling it a crisis reveals the dependency that was always there beneath the layers of independence rhetoric, and it forces a reckoning with what sustainable relationships actually require in practice. Teamwork, sacrifice, and reciprocity are not optional extras. They are the foundation that holds structures together when external pressures mount. When those elements are missing, the structure weakens, and eventually people seek alternatives that offer more stability. Men have found those alternatives in their own discipline and planning, while the wake up call for women is that the world does not owe anyone a soft landing based on past promises or current demands. The stories playing out in public forums and private conversations all point to the same underlying shift. Women in their 30s and 40s express surprise that the approaches and options they enjoyed in their 20s have diminished significantly, while men in the same age groups report greater satisfaction with single life or selective engagement. The gap widens because experiences compound and patterns become clearer with time. Men who have been burned by unbalanced dynamics learn to avoid them entirely, while women who benefited from those dynamics struggle to adapt when the benefits disappear. This is not judgment, it is description of cause and effect in a system where incentives realigned dramatically over decades. The sobering part is that reversing the trend requires more than awareness, it requires behavioral change on a scale that many find uncomfortable because it challenges deeply held assumptions about roles and responsibilities. Men continue to refine their strategies for independence, whether through skill development, asset building, or lifestyle simplification, and the peace they report is consistent across different backgrounds and locations. They value the ability to make decisions without negotiation, the freedom from emotional volatility, and the clarity that comes from directing energy inward rather than outward toward unpredictable outcomes. This does not mean they hate women or reject all interaction. It means they have become highly selective about where they invest and under what conditions. The raw truth is that selectivity on this level changes the power dynamics and forces the other side to either meet the new standards or accept reduced access. Women who panic about the lack of attention are essentially reacting to a market correction where their previous currency of appearance and demands no longer buys the same level of commitment or provision. The broader societal implications include slower family formation, lower birth rates, and shifts in economic participation as each group adapts to the new reality in its own way. Companies notice changes in workforce motivation and retention. Governments see impacts on social services, and cultural commentators struggle to frame the trends without acknowledging the root causes. The straightforward explanation is that when you spend decades telling one group they are the problem and the other group they are empowered without limits, the group labeled as the problem will eventually disengage to protect itself. Men have done exactly that, and the resulting vacuum is revealing truths that were papered over for years. This is the wake up call that demands attention because ignoring it only prolongs the adjustment period and increases the eventual cost for everyone involved. Continuing the narrative, men have also recognized that many complaints from women stem from internal dissatisfaction rather than external failures by men. The constant search for the perfect partner, the endless testing of boundaries, and the prioritization of short term feelings over long term stability create cycles that men no longer wish to enter. Instead, they build lives where their own standards govern the outcomes and where progress is measured by personal metrics rather than external approval. This approach yields results in health, wealth, and mental clarity that stand in contrast to the stress reported by those still entangled in unbalanced dynamics. The authoritative observation is that peace is not passive, it is actively constructed through choices, and men are constructing it deliberately by avoiding the known pitfalls that come with certain types of engagement. Women facing this reality sometimes double down on the same narratives that contributed to the shift, demanding more from men while offering less in return or framing male withdrawal as some form of collective punishment. The truthful response is that it is neither punishment nor temporary. It is adaptation to evidence and experience. Men have seen enough examples of relationships where the load was uneven, the respect was lacking, and the future looked uncertain, and they have chosen a different path. This path includes everything from solo travel to skill mastery to financial strategies that insulate them from volatility. The result is a growing cohort of men who are content with their circumstances and uninterested in re entering the fray without significant changes in the conditions they left behind. That lack of interest is what generates the panic because it removes the assumption of automatic male participation that underpinned many previous strategies. The economic angle remains central because as costs continue to rise, the ability to maintain a certain lifestyle without shared contribution becomes harder for individuals operating alone. Men mitigate this through strategic living and multiple income streams, while many women find themselves confronting the gap between expectations and outcomes. The sobering truth is that independence comes with its own set of responsibilities, and when those responsibilities were downplayed or externalized, the eventual reckoning feels abrupt. Men who embraced responsibility early are now reaping the benefits of preparation, while the wake up call spreads to those who assumed the system would always provide a safety net. This is not about blame, It is about cause and effect playing out in real time across millions of lives. Pattern recognition extends to social media, where men observe the tone and content of discussions and see consistent themes of entitlement, victimhood, and unrealistic expectations. Rather than engage in endless debates, they simply disengage and direct their attention elsewhere, where the returns are higher and the stress is lower. This disengagement is rational because arguments rarely change deeply held views, and the energy is better spent on self improvement. The raw reality is that women who complain about being ignored in public or online are often the same ones who contributed to the conditions that make men cautious or indifferent. The cycle reinforces itself until one side or the other decides to break it through different behavior. And right now, men have chosen the break via withdrawal. This brings the narrative to a point where the future looks different for everyone involved. Men who walk away are building resilience and finding satisfaction in self directed lives. Women who confront the shift are faced with choices about adaptation or continued struggle. Society as a whole must adjust to the new balance of participation and contribution. The hard hitting conclusion is that winter has arrived, the warnings were clear, and the responses have been logical on the side that chose action over complaint. Men are not coming back to rescue the old dynamics, not this time, because they have found something better in their own peace and purpose. The question for those still watching is whether they will recognize the patterns in time to make their own adjustments, or whether they will continue down paths that lead to further isolation and hardship. The data is in the behaviors are clear, and the outcomes are unfolding for anyone willing to look with honest eyes. Men continue to refine their understanding of what brings lasting value to their lives, and they prioritize elements that deliver consistent results without the volatility that often accompanies unbalanced relationships. This includes physical health through disciplined training, mental clarity through focused routines, and financial security through calculated risks and steady accumulation. The peace that results from this focus is not abstract. It is felt in daily life as reduced stress, improved decision making, and greater overall satisfaction. Women who once occupied significant mental and emotional space in men's lives now find that space reclaimed for personal growth, and the contrast becomes more pronounced over time. The straightforward truth is that when men stop centering women in their priorities, the energy redirects toward mastery in other domains, and the benefits compound in ways that are difficult to ignore once experienced. The panic among women manifests in various forms, from increased online complaints about lack of approaches to attempts at reversing the trend through new appeals or demands. Yet, the underlying patterns that led to male withdrawal remain unchanged in many cases, creating a disconnect between the expressed desire for connection and the behaviors that undermine it. Men observe this disconnect and maintain their distance because engagement without resolution only repeats the cycle. The authoritative reality is that sustainable connection requires mutual adjustment, and when one side refuses to adjust, the other protects itself by stepping back. This protection is not weakness, it is strength born from experience and clarity about what works and what does not. Economic realities continue to underscore the shift as inflation pressures, housing shortages, and job market changes affect everyone, but the responses differ based on prior preparation and mindset. Men who embraced minimalist principles and alternative income strategies find themselves better positioned to weather the storm, while many women who relied on traditional support structures or high consumption lifestyles face tighter constraints. The sobering wake up call is that preparation matters, and assumptions about endless provision from others lead to vulnerability when those assumptions prove false. Men have learned this lesson through direct observation, and they apply it by building buffers and redundancies that reduce dependency on any single source, whether a job, a relationship, or a system. This approach delivers a level of control and calm that stands in stark contrast to the uncertainty reported elsewhere. The bear analogy returns as a powerful illustration of mismatched expectations. When women publicly chose the bear over the man in hypothetical scenarios, they signaled a deep distrust that men internalized and acted upon by removing themselves from the equation. The bear, however, provides no practical support, and when real world pressures mount, the absence of male utility becomes a tangible hardship rather than a theoretical preference. Men have responded with realism by honoring the stated preference and focusing on their own survival and comfort. This is not retaliation, it is logical consistency where actions align with expressed boundaries. The result is a separation that forces each side to confront its own capabilities and limitations without the buffer of the other. The wake up call here is that words have consequences, and preferences stated lightly can lead to outcomes that feel heavy when reality sets in. Men deepen their commitment to solitude not as punishment, but as a positive choice that aligns with their observed needs and values. They cultivate environments where they control the variables, reduce unnecessary stress, and direct resources toward outcomes they can influence directly. This includes everything from home setups that promote calm to schedules that prioritize recovery and growth. The raw satisfaction that comes from this self directed life is evident in the way men describe their days, free from the negotiations and emotional labor that previously consumed time and energy. Women who notice the absence sometimes interpret it as a loss of power or attention, but the truthful explanation is that men have simply reallocated their attention to domains that reward it more reliably. This reallocation changes the landscape, and the panic stems from navigating the new terrain without the familiar landmarks. The narrative of independence that was promoted heavily created expectations that reality has not always matched, particularly when economic conditions tightened and personal accountability became unavoidable. Women who embrace the message fully sometimes find themselves facing the same pressures men have managed for generations without the cultural narrative that framed their struggle as heroic or systemic. The straightforward truth is that hardship is part of life for everyone, and the strategies that work involve preparation, resilience, and realistic assessment rather than external blame. Men who internalize this early have built systems that buffer them against volatility, while the adjustment for others is ongoing and often uncomfortable. This difference in timing and approach explains much of the current dynamic where one side appears calm and the other appears agitated. Pattern recognition extends beyond individual interactions to cultural trends where consistent themes emerge around entitlement, low reciprocity, and shifting blame. Men catalog these themes through repeated exposure and reach the conclusion that participation carries higher costs than benefits under current conditions. They respond by creating parallel structures and communities where the rules are clearer and the outcomes more predictable. This includes online spaces dedicated to self improvement, financial strategies, and shared experiences of opting out. The peace found in these spaces reinforces the decision and makes reentry less appealing without fundamental changes. The authoritative observation is that people gravitate toward environments that serve their well being, and men have found such environments by stepping away from dynamics that drain rather than replenish. Women expressing frustration about men not following through or not approaching often overlook the role that their own signals and standards play in creating the hesitation. When messages mix interest with conditions, or when past behaviors suggest high risk, men default to caution or indifference as protective mechanisms. This caution is learned and rational given the prevalence of stories where effort led to negative outcomes. The sobering part is that Changing the dynamic requires addressing the root causes rather than demanding more effort from the side that is already withdrawn. Men have no incentive to increase effort when the previous levels yielded poor returns, and they continue to focus on their own paths until the conditions improve meaningfully on the other side. This dynamic plays out in public spaces where women note the lack of engagement from men who once might have initiated conversations. Men instead move through their days with purpose, focused on tasks and goals without the added layer of social navigation that carries risk without reward. The result is a quiet shift in atmosphere where interactions become more transactional or minimal, and the previous energy of pursuit fades. Women feel the change and express confusion or irritation. But the straightforward explanation is that men have optimized for efficiency and peace by reducing unnecessary exposure to potential complications. This optimization serves them well in a world where time and energy are finite resources and the returns on certain investments have declined sharply. The long term picture suggests continued divergence unless genuine adjustments occur across the board. Men will likely deepen their self reliant lifestyles, building wealth skills and networks that operate independently of traditional structures. Women will face increasing pressure to adapt their strategies to a marketplace where male participation is more selective and conditional. Society will adjust through changing norms around family work and social expectations as the data on marriage rates, cohabitation, and birth trends continues to reflect the underlying shifts. The wake up call is that these changes are not reversible through force or complaint. They require honest confrontation with reality and a willingness to align behavior with sustainable outcomes. Men have made their alignment clear through action, and the ball remains in the other court for those who wish to change the trajectory. Men continue to discover new layers of freedom in their withdrawal from the previous dynamics. They experience the joy of uninterrupted focus on projects that matter to them, whether professional, creative, or personal. They enjoy the absence of constant negotiation over expectations and the clarity that comes from decisions made without external emotional input. This freedom is not isolation, it is liberation from patterns that previously consumed resources without delivering proportional value. The raw truth is that many men feel lighter and more capable once they stop carrying the weight of unbalanced responsibilities, and they guard that lightness jealously against anything that threatens to reintroduce the old stresses. Women who sense this lightness sometimes attempt to re engage, but find that the barriers built from experience are not easily dismantled without demonstrated change. The economic landscape reinforces the wisdom of male adaptation as traditional employment paths become less secure and alternative routes prove more resilient. Men who invested in skills like remote technical work gig flexibility or asset based income find themselves able to maintain comfort even as broader markets fluctuate. This resilience comes from planning and discipline rather than luck, and it stands as a model for anyone facing uncertainty. The sobering contrast is that many who relied on different strategies now encounter gaps that are harder to close without similar preparation. The wake up call spreads gradually as more people witness the outcomes and recognize that proactive steps yield better results than reactive complaints. Pattern recognition sharpens with time, and men apply it across domains from personal interactions to cultural signals to economic indicators. They see the consistent mismatch between stated desires and actual behaviors, and they adjust their level of involvement accordingly. This adjustment is not emotional, it is calculated based on evidence and probability. The authoritative reality is that rational actors respond to incentives, and when the incentives for engagement diminish, the rational response is reduced engagement. Men have applied this principle consistently, and the resulting separation highlights the strength of logic over wishful thinking. Women navigating this separation often express the desire for things to return to previous states, but the truthful assessment is that previous states were built on conditions that no longer hold, and new equilibria must form through different means. The bare choice remains a potent symbol because it encapsulated a moment of widespread sentiment that men took at face value. When the preference for the bear over the man was voiced loudly and repeatedly, men honored it by removing themselves from consideration and focusing on self preservation. The bear offers no compromise, no provision, and no dialogue, and when hardship arrives, the practical implications become clear. Men have embraced their role in this new equation by prioritizing their own survival and refusing to insert themselves where they are not wanted or trusted. This is straightforward realism, not spite, and it allows both sides to learn through direct experience rather than continued illusion. The wake up call is that stated preferences shape reality, and ignoring that shaping leads to unexpected outcomes when the consequences arrive. Men deepen their mastery of solitude by turning it into a deliberate practice rather than a default state. They curate their environments, their schedules, and their inputs to maximize calm and productivity. They pursue knowledge in areas that interest them, build physical strength through consistent effort, and cultivate social connections that reinforce positive values without drama. The satisfaction that results is authentic because it stems from internal alignment rather than external validation. This practice spreads among men who share experiences and strategies, creating networks of mutual support that operate independently of previous structures. Women who observe these networks sometimes feel excluded, but the truthful explanation is that exclusion was a choice born from patterns that made inclusion costly for the other side. Changing that cost requires changing the patterns, and the evidence suggests that recognition of this necessity is still spreading. The financial strategies men employ reflect the same realism that guides their social choices. They live below their means, invest in assets that generate returns, and develop skills that allow flexibility across different economic conditions. This creates a buffer against volatility that many others lack, and it provides a sense of security that is self generated rather than dependent. The contrast with debt driven lifestyles becomes more apparent as conditions tighten and the ability to weather storms without external aid proves its value. The sobering truth is that financial independence is not a slogan, it is a set of disciplined actions repeated over time. And men who embrace those actions early now enjoy the fruits while others scramble to catch up. This scramble generates the panic that is visible in public discourse, and the wake up call is that catching up requires the same discipline that was previously dismissed or delayed. This narrative of adaptation and consequence continues to unfold with each passing month as more men commit to their chosen paths and more women confront the realities of the shift. The intensity of the panic varies, but the underlying cause remains the same: a mismatch between expectations built over decades and the current marketplace of participation and value. Men have voted with their feet by walking away, and the silence that follows speaks volumes about the effectiveness of their choice. The raw power of that silence is that it cannot be argued with or negotiated away. It simply exists as the new baseline until different behaviors create different incentives. Women who wish to alter the baseline must address the reasons for the withdrawal directly, rather than demanding a return to previous conditions without change. The authoritative truth is that change starts with self examination and adjustment. And the evidence of whether that process is underway will show in actions rather than words. Men find increasing value in the simplicity that comes from reduced entanglement. They enjoy meals. They prepare themselves spaces they control and time that belongs fully to their priorities. This simplicity is not deprivation. It is freedom from the complexity that often accompanied previous dynamics, where expectations multiplied without corresponding contributions. The peace of mind that results allows for clearer thinking, better health, and more consistent progress toward long term goals. Women who once filled parts of that mental space now find it occupied by purpose, and the shift feels abrupt to those who did not anticipate the depth of male resolve. The sobering wake up call is that resolve built from experience is difficult to shake, and men have built it layer by layer through observation and consequence. The online space amplifies the contrast as women post about their frustrations with low effort from men, while men post about their satisfaction with low drama lives. The two narratives run parallel without much intersection because the underlying premises differ so sharply. Men see their approach as victorious adaptation, while women see it as problematic withdrawal. The truthful bridge between the two is that both sides are responding to the same set of conditions, but from different starting points and with different toolkits. Closing the gap requires acknowledging the validity of the other perspective and working toward mutual benefit rather than one sided demands. Whether that acknowledgement happens widely remains to be seen, but the current trajectory suggests continued separation until the costs of separation become high enough to force reconsideration. Economic data and cultural trends support the idea that this separation is not imaginary, but measurable in shifting behaviors around dating, marriage, and workforce participation. Men who opt for gig work, remote roles, or entrepreneurial paths report higher satisfaction with their autonomy, while traditional structures show strain from reduced male investment. The wake up call here is that societies function best when both halves contribute according to their strengths, and when one half disengages, the whole feels the imbalance. Men have disengaged from certain roles, and the adjustment process is revealing where the dependencies were strongest. This revelation is uncomfortable, but necessary for long term stability. And the raw truth is that discomfort often precedes meaningful change when illusions are stripped away. Men continue to share strategies for thriving in solitude through forums and conversations that emphasize practical steps rather than theory. They discuss everything from meal planning to investment vehicles to mental frameworks that maintain motivation without external pressure. These strategies spread because they deliver results, and the men implementing them become living examples of what is possible when energy is directed inward. The contrast with narratives of struggle elsewhere highlights the effectiveness of the approach and encourages further adoption. Women who encounter these examples sometimes react with criticism or attempts to pull men back into previous roles, but the response from men is consistent maintenance of boundaries because the benefits of the current path outweigh the costs of re-engagement. This consistency is what makes the shift feel permanent to those on the outside looking in. The bear analogy lingers in cultural memory because it captured a moment of peak disconnection where trust had eroded to the point of preferring wilderness danger over human interaction. Men took that sentiment seriously and acted by creating their own form of wilderness where they control the variables and minimize risks from unpredictable elements. The peace they find in that self created space is profound because it is earned through deliberate choice rather than default. The sobering part for women is that reversing the preference requires rebuilding trust through consistent actions that demonstrate reliability and mutual respect rather than demands or complaints. Until that rebuilding occurs, the separation persists and both sides learn to navigate their respective paths with the tools available to them. The wake up call is that trust is fragile, and once broken, it requires more than words to restore. The economic landscape continues to tighten in ways that reward the men who have already built their buffers and punish those who relied on outdated assumptions about constant support. Companies keep trimming payrolls in quiet waves, replacing steady positions with artificial intelligence systems that handle routine tasks without the overhead of benefits or drama. Many of those positions sit in sectors where women clustered during the push for certain career paths, and the fallout leaves gaps that traditional safety nets struggle to fill. Men who walked away from the 9 to 5 grind years ago now operate with multiple small income streams that add up to steady comfort without the daily commute or office politics. Some run remote cybersecurity gigs from laptops in quiet apartments. Others trade crypto during favorable windows or handle light delivery tasks only when it fits their schedule. The key is they keep overhead low, life far below what they earn, and direct the surplus into assets that generate more without constant labor. Real estate plays a big role here, where a man buys a modest property, rents out rooms or a unit to cover the mortgage, and lives in the remaining space, turning shelter into both home and income generator. This setup delivers a form of simple luxury that feels like freedom, because nothing hangs on the whims of a boss or the demands of a partner who might escalate costs unexpectedly. Women facing the same pressures often carry heavier debt loads from lifestyles marketed as essential through constant social media exposure. The expectation of certain experiences, certain appearances, and certain levels of consumption creates a cycle where income never quite catches up to spending, and the absence of male subsidy through dates or shared expenses makes the gap feel wider. When men stop filling that gap, the reality of solo financial management hits with full force, and many discover that the independence narrative did not prepare them for the grind of covering every expense without backup. The sobering truth is that self reliance sounds empowering in theory, but demands consistent discipline in practice. And the men who embrace that discipline early now move through tightening times with relative calm. They focus on minimalist living, not as sacrifice, but as strategy, stripping away what does not serve long term peace and keeping only what delivers real value. A simple home, a functional vehicle, basic healthy food, and time for personal pursuits create a quality of life that feels abundant compared to the stress of chasing status or keeping up with inflated expectations. This divergence in financial paths stems directly from different priorities shaped over years of cultural messaging. Men absorbed the lessons of repeated criticism and risk and responded by building internal systems that reduce dependency on external validation or support. They learned to enjoy their own company, to find satisfaction in progress measured by personal standards rather than social approval. Women who internalized the opposite messaging, that they could have it all without trade offs, now confront the limits of that promise when external conditions shift and the support structures they counted on fade. The panic surfaces in public discussions about a dating crisis or a broader societal breakdown, but the root remains the same. Men have recognized patterns of one sided effort and chosen to redirect their resources toward outcomes they control. This redirection is not temporary. It reflects a deep recalibration based on evidence that engagement under previous terms led to net losses in time, money, and mental health. Pattern recognition sharpens further when men examine the emotional dynamics that repeatedly surfaced in past interactions. Women often prioritize immediate feelings over long term facts, leading to arguments that cycle through shame, insults guilt, and gaslighting rather than reaching resolution or compromise. The need to be right at all costs turns conversations into battlegrounds where logic takes a back seat to emotional validation. Men who experience this cycle enough times reach the straightforward conclusion that winning through dialogue is impossible because the rules change mid exchange to favor feelings every time. The only reliable victory becomes walking away permanently, removing oneself from the arena where the game is rigged. This is not defeat, it is strategic retreat that preserves resources for better uses, and once a man tastes the calm that follows, he rarely volunteers to re enter the chaos. The raw truth is that many women cannot or will not adjust this pattern because it serves short term emotional needs, even when it destroys long term connection, and men have stopped pretending otherwise. Kevin Samuels delivered the warning with clarity that winter would come and that the comfortable assumptions of endless male availability would face harsh tests. That season has arrived, and the rescue many expected does not materialize because men have decided their own survival and peace take priority over repeating past mistakes. Women now face the world without the buffer of male utility that once subsidized dates, covered shared costs, or provided emotional and financial stability through marriage or informal arrangements. The destitution that follows is not abstract. It shows up in mounting bills, strained living situations, and a growing sense of vulnerability when no one steps in to ease the load. Men are not looking back because the patterns that drove them away remain visible and unchanged. They view women as liabilities in many contexts where the risks of drama, legal exposure, or financial drain outweigh any potential benefits, and they act on that assessment with calm realism rather than anger. The Bear in the Woods example captures the depth of the disconnect. Millions of women stated openly that they would choose encountering a bear over a man, framing the average male as more dangerous than wild nature. Men heard that message loud and clear and responded by stepping aside entirely, letting the preferred option handle the responsibilities. The bear, however, does not pay rent, does not provide stability, and does not offer partnership when times get hard. When economic pressures mount and practical needs arise, the absence of male provision leaves a void that feelings cannot fill. This is the sobering wake up call. Playing out in real time, women discover that stated preferences carry real world consequences, and men enforce those consequences by honoring the boundary that was drawn. There is no spite in this response, only logical consistency, where actions match the signals sent, and men refuse to insert themselves where they are unwelcome or distrusted. Men deepen their mastery of solitude by turning it into a deliberate lifestyle that rewards discipline and clarity. They wake up to routines. They design themselves, pursue physical training that builds strength without external pressure, and direct mental energy towards skills that increase independence. Remote work in technical fields allows them to earn from anywhere while keeping social overhead low. Gig economy tasks fill gaps only when needed without locking them into rigid schedules. Investments in assets like rental properties or diversified holdings create passive flows that support minimalist comfort without constant hustle. The peace that results feels profound because it comes without the interruptions of emotional testing or shifting expectations. Once a man experiences consistent days free from drama, he guards that constancy, fiercely recognizing it as the foundation for long term well being. Women who observe this piece from the outside sometimes label it avoidance or immaturity, but the truthful assessment is that it represents optimized energy allocation, where returns on investment finally favor the investor. Online dating provides a clear mirror for the shift. Women report plenty of matches, yet most conversations drift into silence without dates being suggested or followed through. Men match, speak briefly, and then withdraw because early red flags appear, or because the effort required no longer seems justified by the likely outcome. The simp economy that once propped up attention and financial gestures has collapsed as men wake up to the imbalance where they give without receiving equivalent value in return. Conversations that demand endless emotional labor or validation without reciprocity die quickly because men conserve their resources for their own purposes. Women feel the frustration of this change and express it through posts about ghosting or lack of initiative, but rarely connected to the patterns of entitlement or low contribution that men have cataloged over years. The marketplace corrects itself when one side raises standards or lowers participation, and that correction is what we see now, with men choosing quiet disengagement over continued investment in low yield situations. Society at large feels the strain when large numbers of men step back from traditional roles of provider and participant. Marriage rates continue to decline. Birth rates reflect the reduced commitment to family formation, and economic participation shifts as men build parallel systems outside corporate or relational structures. The illusions that everything would balance out through policy or messaging crack under the weight of observable behavior. Women who thrived in environments where male utility was assumed now confront the reality that assumption no longer holds, and the adjustment demands more self accountability than many anticipated. The panic manifests as louder calls for men to step up again, but the straightforward response from men is continued focus on their own paths because the incentives have not realigned in their favor. This creates a feedback loop where separation deepens until genuine changes in behavior create new incentives, or both sides accept the new normal of reduced interdependence. The cultural messaging of the past 50 years played a central role in building this outcome. Radical strains of feminism labeled masculinity toxic, portrayed men as defective or oppressive, and encouraged women to view traditional partnership as limitation rather than mutual strength. Men absorbed those messages through education, media, and social interactions and responded by internalizing the risks of engagement while questioning their own value in the system. Over time, the logical conclusion became withdrawal because why participate in a framework that constantly criticizes your nature and increases your exposure to negative outcomes? The result is a generation of men who find peace in solitude, who view relationships as potential liabilities, and who choose to thrive alone rather than compromise their well being for uncertain returns. This choice is not born from hatred, but from cold pattern recognition that repeated exposure to certain dynamics leads to net loss. Women now call male walking away a crisis because they discover the limits of operating without the support that was previously available. They cannot easily replace the utility men provided through dating expenses, shared living arrangements, or the stability that allowed certain lifestyles to continue. When that utility fades, the consequences hit in the form of financial strain, emotional isolation, and a general sense of instability that was not part of the independent script. Men, on the other hand, adapt by embracing minimalist principles, developing flexible income sources, and building lives that require less external input to maintain comfort. The contrast is stark, and it serves as a wake up call for anyone still clinging to the idea that the old dynamics would persist indefinitely. Winter has arrived, the warnings were issued, and the men who listened have positioned themselves accordingly, while the adjustment for others proves more difficult than expected. Men continue to refine their understanding of what constitutes real value in their lives. They prioritize health through consistent training knowledge, through deliberate study, and security through strategic asset building. They enjoy the freedom of making decisions without negotiation, the calm of environments they control, and the satisfaction of progress that belongs entirely to them. This internal focus creates a virtuous cycle where better health leads to clearer thinking leads to better decisions, and better decisions compound into greater independence. Women who once occupied central positions in male attention now find that space filled with purpose, and the shift feels jarring to those who assumed attention would always flow in their direction. The raw truth is that attention is earned through mutual value, not demanded through complaints, and men have stopped providing it when the exchange feels one sided. The bear preference lingers as a cultural marker because it revealed the depth of distrust that had built up over time. Men took the statement at face value and removed themselves from consideration, allowing women to test their preferred option in practice. When hardship arrives and the bear offers no help, the practical reality sets in that preferences have costs. Men respond by maintaining their distance, honoring the boundary that was set, and focusing energy on self preservation. This is realism in action, not cruelty, and it forces both sides to confront their own capabilities without illusion. The sobering wake up call spreads as more women experience the void left by absent male utility and recognize that rebuilding connection requires addressing the root patterns that drove men away in the first place. Economic pressures amplify the lesson because as inflation persists and costs rise, the value of reliable partnership increases, yet the trust necessary for that partnership has eroded. Men calculate the risks of commitment, including potential asset loss, emotional drain, and legal complications, and decide the current conditions do not justify the exposure. They opt for arrangements that keep control in their hands, whether short term interactions on strict terms or full independence. Women who counted on automatic participation find leverage diminished, and the panic grows as they navigate tighter circumstances without the previous buffer. The truthful assessment is that sustainable relationships require reciprocity. And when that reciprocity is absent, the rational actor protects himself by withdrawing. Men have done exactly that, and the resulting separation reveals where dependencies were strongest. Men deepen their commitment to minimalist living by focusing on essentials that deliver maximum return with minimum complication. They maintain clean, functional spaces, eat simple, nutritious meals, and pursue activities that build rather than drain. This approach frees mental bandwidth for long term planning and reduces the stress that comes from chasing external markers of success. The comfort they achieve feels luxurious because it is self generated and sustainable rather than dependent on fluctuating external inputs. Women drowning in debt from higher consumption patterns confront the gap between lifestyle expectations and current realities, and the adjustment often involves painful reevaluation. The wake up call here is that true independence demands living within means. And when that principle was ignored, the consequences compound during tight times. Pattern recognition extends to the broader societal level where men observe declining marriage rates, falling birth rates, and shifting workforce dynamics. They see the system straining under reduced male investment and recognize that their withdrawal contributes to the pressure while protecting their own position. This is not sabotage. It is natural response to misaligned incentives where participation carried higher costs than rewards. The authoritative truth is that societies function through balanced contribution, and when one side disengages, the whole must adjust or face decline. Men have disengaged from certain roles, and the adjustment process exposes the fragility of assumptions that everything would continue as before. The sobering part is that reversal requires fundamental changes in behavior and expectations that many have not yet embraced. The online space continues to highlight the divide as women express frustration over lack of follow through while men celebrate the peace of reduced engagement. Conversations in male spaces are focused on strategies for independence, financial growth, and mental resilience, while female spaces often circle around complaints about male behavior without deep self examination. The narratives run parallel, reflecting different experiences of the same conditions. Closing the gap would require honest dialogue about patterns and accountability, but the current momentum favors continued separation until cost force reconsideration. Men have no incentive to increase participation when past efforts yielded poor results and they continue building their own systems that deliver reliable returns. This brings us to the long term implications where the shift reshapes family formation, economic structures, and cultural norms. Men who walk away build resilience that serves them well across changing conditions. They develop skills, adapt to new technologies, and create networks that operate outside traditional frameworks. Women face increasing pressure to adapt their own strategies to a world where male utility is no longer automatic and where self reliance becomes essential rather than optional. The panic that surfaces now is the early stage of that pressure, and the wake up call is that adaptation through accountability offers a path forward while denial prolongs hardship. Reality does not bend to preferences, it rewards those who align with observable facts, and men have aligned through their choices. Men find increasing satisfaction in the simplicity of self directed lives. They enjoy uninterrupted focus on goals. They set themselves the freedom from emotional volatility and the clarity that comes from directing energy toward measurable progress. This satisfaction compounds over time, creating men who are healthier, wealthier, and more at peace than they were under previous dynamics. The contrast with reported struggles elsewhere underscores the effectiveness of their approach and encourages further commitment to the path. Women who sense this satisfaction sometimes attempt to re engage, but encounter firm boundaries built from experience. Changing those boundaries requires demonstrated shifts in behavior that address the patterns men observed, and until those shifts occur, the separation persists. The economic strategies men employ reflect the same realism. They diversify income, reduce expenses, and build assets that generate returns with minimal ongoing effort. This creates a buffer against volatility that many lack and provides security that feels earned rather than granted. The sobering truth is that such buffers come from consistent action over time, and men who started early now reap the benefits while others face steeper climbs. The wake up call spreads as more people witness the outcomes and recognize the value of proactive preparation over reactive demands. Pattern recognition remains the foundation of male decision making. Men catalog repeated behaviors across interactions and reach conclusions based on probability rather than hope. When patterns show high risk of drama, low reciprocity, and shifting rules, they adjust involvement downward, protecting their resources and peace. This adjustment is rational and evidence based, not emotional. The authoritative reality is that rational actors respond to incentives, and current incentives favor disengagement for men. Women who wish to change the incentives must alter the underlying patterns that created them, and the evidence suggests that process is slow and uneven. The bear analogy serves as a constant reminder of the disconnect. Stated preferences shaped actions, and men honored those preferences by stepping aside. When practical realities hit, the limitations of the choice become clear. Men maintain their distance, allowing each side to learn through direct experience. The sobering wake up call is that words and preferences have consequences, and ignoring that fact leads to outcomes that feel heavy when reality arrives. Rebuilding trust requires consistent actions that demonstrate change rather than repeated demands for the old status quo. Men continue refining their lifestyles, focusing on health, knowledge, and security. They train, eat well, study, and invest, creating systems that support long term well being without external dependence. The peace they achieve is tangible, and they protect it by avoiding situations that introduce unnecessary stress. This protection is strength, not weakness, born from clarity about what serves them best. Women confronting the absence of previous attention face the task of building their own resilience, and the adjustment period tests assumptions that were taken for granted. Economic tightening continues to highlight the differences in preparation. Men with flexible income and low overhead navigate the pressures with greater ease, while those reliant on single sources or high consumption face harder choices. The contrast serves as ongoing education for anyone paying attention. The wake up call is that preparation through discipline delivers results when conditions change, and assumptions about constant support prove unreliable. This narrative of cause, consequence, and adaptation unfolds across millions of lives, reshaping the social landscape one decision at a time. Men who walk away find peace in solitude and purpose in self mastery. Women who face the shift confront the need for genuine self reliance and behavioral adjustment. Society adjusts through changing norms and structures as the old equilibria give way to new realities. The hard truth is that winter has arrived. The patterns are clear, and the men who recognize them have acted accordingly. The future belongs to those who align with reality rather than fight against it. And the current separation tests that alignment for everyone involved. The intensity of the change becomes more evident as time passes and the effects compound. Men report higher levels of daily satisfaction, lower stress, and greater control over their circumstances. They build communities around shared values of discipline, independence, and realism, creating support systems that reinforce positive outcomes without the drama of mixed dynamics. These communities focus on practical knowledge, financial strategies, and personal growth, turning individual efforts into collective strength. Women observing from the outside sometimes criticize the exclusivity, but the truthful reason for the boundaries is protection against patterns that previously led to net loss. Men guard their peace because they have earned it through experience, and they see no reason to risk it without evidence of fundamental change. Financial independence becomes a cornerstone of this new male approach. Men live deliberately below their means, directing surplus toward assets that appreciate or generate income. Rental properties, gig flexibility, remote skills, and diversified investments create layers of security that buffer against economic shifts. The minimalist mindset keeps lifestyle costs low, allowing even modest income to feel abundant. This stands in contrast to debt fueled consumption that leaves many vulnerable when support structures weaken. The sobering wake up call is that true freedom comes from controlling your own expenses and income rather than depending on others to bridge gaps. And men who internalize that lesson early now enjoy the results. The online dating environment remains a stark indicator of the broader shift. Women describe abundance in matches, but scarcity in meaningful follow through because men apply strict filters based on past experiences. Conversations end quickly when entitlement, low effort, or mismatched expectations appear. because men refuse to invest where returns are unlikely. The previous dynamic, where male initiative carried the load, has given way to selective participation or complete withdrawal. Women feel the frustration of this change and voice it publicly, but the root cause lies in the accumulated evidence that effort often led to one sided outcomes. Men have learned to conserve energy for their own development, and the marketplace reflects that conservation through reduced engagement. Kevin Samuels warned that the comfortable era was ending and that women would face winter without the rescue they assumed would always come. That prediction has materialized as men prioritize their own paths and refuse to return to dynamics that cost them dearly. The panic among women reflects the sudden confrontation with realities that were downplayed for decades. They discover that self reliance without preparation leaves gaps that feelings cannot fill, and that the utility men provided was not optional in many practical senses. Men view this as the natural consequence of choices made over years, and they continue forward without looking back because the patterns remain consistent and the peace they have found is worth protecting. The bear in the woods remains a powerful symbol of the disconnect. When women chose the bear, they signaled deep distrust, and men responded by honoring that signal through disengagement. The bear provides no practical support, and when hardship strikes, the preference reveals its limitations. Men maintain their boundary, allowing each side to experience the outcomes of their stated positions. This realism forces confrontation with truth rather than continued illusion, and the wake up call is that preferences shape reality in tangible ways. Rebuilding connection would require addressing the distrust directly through consistent, reliable behavior. But until that happens, the separation serves as a protective mechanism for men. Men deepen their practice of solitude by focusing on elements that deliver lasting value. They cultivate physical strength, mental clarity, and financial security through daily disciplines that compound over time. They enjoy the freedom of self directed days, the absence of emotional testing, and the satisfaction of progress that belongs solely to them. This lifestyle feels like luxury because it is sustainable and self generated rather than dependent on fluctuating external factors. The raw power of this approach is that once experienced, it becomes the new standard, and men guard it against anything that threatens to reintroduce old stresses. Economic realities continue to underscore the wisdom of male adaptation. As costs rise and traditional paths become less reliable, the men who built flexibility and buffers navigate with greater ease. They adjust income streams, reduce expenses, and maintain control over their environments. This resilience is not accidental. It comes from deliberate choices made in response to observed patterns. The contrast with those still struggling highlights the importance of early preparation, and the wake up call spreads as more people witness the difference in outcomes. Pattern recognition remains the guiding principle. Men observe repeated behaviors across contexts and adjust their level of involvement to minimize risk and maximize peace. When patterns indicate high drama, low reciprocity, and emotional override of facts, they step back permanently because engagement has proven ineffective. This decision is authoritative because it rests on evidence rather than emotion, and it delivers consistent results in the form of calmer lives and better resource allocation. Women who wish to reverse the trend must change the patterns that created it, and the current evidence suggests that recognition of this necessity is still developing. The societal implications grow clearer with each passing year. Reduced male participation in traditional roles affects family formation, economic productivity, and cultural cohesion. The system strains where dependencies were highest, and the adjustment reveals the strength or weakness of underlying assumptions. Men who walked away protect their position by building independent systems, while the broader culture grapples with the vacuum left behind. The sobering truth is that balance requires contribution from all sides, and when one side withdraws, the others must adapt or accept decline. Men have adapted through self reliance, and the invitation for others is to do the same through honest self assessment and behavioral change. This brings the narrative full circle to the core premise that men walking away has created panic because it removes the buffer that many took for granted. The winter Kevin Samuels described has arrived, and men are not returning to the old roles under the old terms. They have found peace in solitude, purpose in self mastery, and security in strategic living. Women face the consequences of decades of messaging that downplayed mutual dependence and now must navigate tighter realities without the previous support. The hard hitting conclusion is that reality has spoken through actions and outcomes, and those who align with it will fare better than those who fight against it. Men have aligned, and the peace they enjoy stands as proof that the choice was correct. The intensity remains because the stakes are real. Men continue refining their strategies, building stronger buffers and deeper independence. They share knowledge in private circles, focusing on what works rather than what used to work. The communities that form around these principles reinforce discipline and realism, creating environments where peace thrives. Women who encounter these communities feel the distance, but the distance exists for a reason, rooted in experience and pattern recognition. Changing the distance requires changing the experiences, and until that change occurs, the separation protects the gains men have made. Financial strategies evolve as men test new approaches to income and asset building. They combine remote skills with gig flexibility, rental income with investment diversification, creating robust systems that withstand volatility. Minimalist living keeps the foundation solid, allowing comfort without excess. This model delivers a form of quiet luxury that feels authentic because it is earned through discipline rather than borrowed from others. The wake up call for those facing debt or instability is that similar discipline applied consistently can close gaps, but it demands the same commitment that men have shown. The online environment keeps reflecting the divide, with women noting lack of initiative from men and men noting the peace of reduced interaction. The patterns repeat because the underlying incentives have not shifted. Men apply filters early and withdraw when value appears low, preserving energy for their own growth. This selectivity is learned and rational, and it reshapes the marketplace in visible ways. The truthful assessment is that markets respond to behavior, and when behavior changes on one side, participation adjusts on the other. Kevin Samuels' message echoes louder now because the predictions have materialized. Winter is here, the rescue is not coming, and men have chosen their own paths. The panic reflects the gap between expectation and reality, and the sobering truth is that closing that gap requires accountability and adaptation rather than complaint. Men will not return until conditions change meaningfully, and the evidence suggests they are content to wait while building their own worlds. The bear remains a symbol of the moment when distrust peaked and men responded by stepping aside. Practical realities have tested that choice, and the limitations have become clear. Men honor the boundary, maintaining distance and focusing inward. This realism serves as protection and education, allowing each side to learn through consequence. The wake up call is that stated preferences carry weight, and men have given them weight by acting accordingly. Men continue to thrive in solitude by treating it as a skill to master rather than a state to endure. They build routines that promote health clarity and security turning daily life into a source of satisfaction. The freedom from drama, the control over their environment, and the progress towards self set goals create a lifestyle that many find superior to previous entanglements. This superiority is not theoretical, it is felt in reduced stress, improved outcomes, and greater overall peace. Women confronting the absence face their own path of building similar resilience and the adjustment tests long held assumptions. Economic tightening keeps highlighting the value of preparation. Men with diversified streams and low costs move through pressures with stability, while others face harder recalibrations. The difference underscores the importance of proactive steps, and the wake up call is that those steps deliver when assumptions fail. Men took the steps early and now enjoy the buffer while the lesson spreads gradually. Pattern recognition guides every decision. Men see the cycles of emotional override, lack of compromise, and shifting rules, and they choose avoidance as the effective strategy. This choice is not emotional, it is evidence based, and it yields consistent peace. The authoritative truth is that when dialogue fails, withdrawal succeeds, and men have chosen success on their terms. The societal strain becomes more visible as reduced participation affects multiple domains. The adjustment process reveals dependencies and forces confrontation with reality. Men protect their gains through continued self reliance, while the broader culture seeks new equilibria. The sobering part is that new equilibria require honest alignment with facts, and men have provided the example through their actions. This concludes the deep exploration of the shift. Men walking away has created panic because it removes the assumed buffer and forces confrontation with consequences. The winter has arrived. The patterns are clear, and the men who recognize them have built lives of peace and purpose. The hard hitting reality is that the old dynamics are gone, and the new landscape favors those who adapt through realism and discipline. Men have adapted, and their example stands as the wake up call for everyone watching the changes unfold. The future will belong to those who face the truth head on rather than cling to illusions that no longer serve. To the 1 hour gang who made it all the way to the end, I appreciate you sticking with this deep dive into the real shifts happening right now. If you are enjoying these angry guy videos and want to show some support, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description of the video. Tell me in the comments what you thought about what we discussed, whether you agree with the patterns we laid out, and share your own thoughts on where this is all heading. Like the video if you like it. Do not forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA men walking away in cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.